Palermo, Sicily. Two prisoners exit the dungeon, squinting in a light they haven't known for what feels like ages. They're being led into the banquet hall of Frederick II, Holy Roman Emperor. And what they find there shocks them. An actual feast! Just piles of food, the kind they've dreamed of ever since they were locked away and fed only bread and water. So they tear into the meat, into confections, into vegetables, into desserts. And then once they've had their fill, their jailers are issued new orders. They put one of the prisoners in a soft bed, ordering him to sleep, and they bring the other prisoner outside and send him on a vigorous hunt. Hours later, both prisoners are back in the dungeon. But this time, the emperor himself is before them. This ruler, expelled from the grace of God, declared a precursor to the Antichrist, and a man known for his interest in biology. On one side of him, an executioner, and on the other, a doctor. At his word, the executioner steps forward, killing one prisoner, then the other. And once the deed is done, the doctor begins his work, cutting into the men's entrails. Emperor Frederick leans forward, fascinated, seeing which man has digested better, the one who exercised or the one who rested. For he is a man of unlimited curiosity, unlimited power, and endless rootlessness. Thanks so much to Incogni for helping to keep people's personal data personal. June 1229, Southern Italy. The troops pledged to Gregory IX, the ones marching south and seizing ports across the peninsula, wear the crossed keys of the papacy. This symbol represents Gregory having power over both heaven and earth, and that's what this war, the one they call the War of the Crossed Keys, is all about. For his spiritual power had not been enough to contain Emperor Frederick. Gregory had previously excommunicated the vile emperor, and yet he had gone on crusade anyway. Then, in retaliation for the excommunication, Frederick's lords had invaded papal territory. Gregory then responded with an alliance with the Lombard League and invaded Frederick's territory funded by money donated from as far away as Portugal. With all of the backing of the papacy, and fueled by a rumor that Frederick was actually dead, the Northern Italian alliance had swept all challengers before it, and it only had not captured Sicily because the troops were now exhausted and low on funds. Which is when Frederick returned to Italy, very much alive, with an army of crusaders, and the Pope's tired forces scattered before the might of the Holy Roman Emperor. Frederick was furious, for Gregory had senselessly undermined the Sixth Crusade, releasing knights of their vows to fight for him. And though many didn't listen, Gregory had turned the Templars and Hospitallars against him and tried unsuccessfully to convince the German nobles to strip his title of Holy Roman Emperor. Now he must take his lands back by force. After 5 months of fighting, Frederick finally reaches the borders of the Papal States and opens negotiations. The resulting treaty reversed Frederick's excommunication, as well as all other acts Gregory had used to target him. In return, Frederick recognized Papal State territories and surrendered the authority he had over the church in Sicily. Any of his subjects who took arms against him at the Pope's instigation were also absolved. Now, clearly, this chaos that had happened in his absence was a problem, but one that Frederick could fix if he called upon his favorite thing, reform. In Sicily and his southern territories, Frederick started a program to revamp the administration and bureaucracy with an eye towards absolutist monarchy, a realm governed directly by Frederick, who was God's representative on earth, the results of which were the Constitutions of Melfi, issued in 1231. This was a wide-ranging reform of Sicilian domains that diminished the powers of nobles and cities, instead setting up a pyramid of secular bureaucrats and ministers directly loyal to the emperor. These edicts also established equality before the law, made priests subject to civil law, insisted on public evidence-based trials, and banned judicial practices like trial by fire or trial by combat, which Frederick labeled as superstitious. It's generally believed that Frederick wrote these himself. But these were for Sicily specifically, and not the Holy Roman Empire. See, Frederick's northern lands were more complicated, carved up into various states run by princes, causing Frederick's personal lands and imperial territory to be disconnected and surrounded. Germany, if anything, needed a light touch, so as not to disturb what was essentially the treasure chest and recruiting ground that helped fuel Frederick's wars over the Italian territory he actually cared about. and it was currently nominally under control of his son, Henry VII, who did not have a light touch. In fact, the ink on the Constitutions of Melfi had barely dried before Henry declared that his father had no authority over him and started pushing aggressive political policy against the princes of the Holy Roman Empire. In fact, it was so aggressive that those princes rose up, turned the tables on Henry, and forced him to agree to a document ceding them a number of previously royal rights. The princes could now mint their own coins, see how that went wrong in our 30 Years' War series, levy tolls for crossing their land, build and improve fortresses without permission, and had to approve new imperial legislation. Frederick recalled Henry to Italy and gave him a dressing down before sending him back home. However, he also confirmed the new agreement. After all, he had to keep the princes happy. But as soon as Henry was back in Germany, he was up to his old tricks again. He instigated more chaos by intervening in multiple disputes with princes and prince-bishops, then rebelled against his father again. Frederick, in response, publicly censured his eldest son and encouraged Pope Gregory to excommunicate him in preparation for a military invasion. Except when Frederick came across the Alps to spank his son, it wasn't with an army, but rather a menagerie of animals. Giraffes, lynxes, zebras, monkeys, with baggage carried by camels he'd brought back from Crusade. And at this brazen display of power and bravado, the rebellion just sort of melted. I mean, it kind of makes sense when you think about it. To come all this way with your court of exotic beasts and just expect the local lords to support you? I mean, that kind of confidence is pretty much better than any army. Henry capitulated, and Frederick had him locked up for the rest of his life. Perhaps due to his rebellion, or perhaps as a quarantine, since he'd somehow contracted leprosy. Henry died a decade later in a bizarre accident, where, being moved between prisons, he fell off his horse into a convenient ravine. In the wake of Henry's rebellion, Frederick also pushed through a reform program in the Holy Roman Empire, granting princes more responsibility in local government to make it easier for Frederick to rule from afar, which was a sign of strength, not weakness. For Frederick was massively popular in Germany and essentially never wanted to come here again. So, by 1237, he had installed his 9-year-old son Conrad as the new king of the Romans to replace Henry, and with that all tied up, it was back to what he cared about. Italy. He needed to invade northern Italy and pacify the nobles of the Lombard League who previously sided with Gregory and refused to submit. Though it was the toughest part of the empire, the area where Frederick held the least territory, city-states were strong, and where Gregory held major sway. Frederick crossed from Germany to Italy in late 1238, spreading rumors that he planned to winter his army before any major assault. It was a bluff. Scouts indicated via smoke signals when the Lombard armies left their defensive positions, and his army pounced, destroying them under hails of arrows from his Muslim archers and charges of Teutonic knights. When Frederick marched into the first city he'd conquered, he did so in a triumph, led by his pet elephant, drawing the city-state's militia cart, hung with captured military banners, and standing atop it was the League's defeated commander. After that spectacle, however, things did start to bog down in the conflict. The cities of northern Italy provided more resistance than anticipated, especially after Gregory now openly threw in on their side. And then, basically, Frederick and Gregory used all their interrupt cards at the same time. For his first reaction, Frederick played Invade the Papal States. Good move, classic. Then, in response to Invade the Papal States, Gregory played Excommunicate. Also an oldie but a goodie. Then, in response to Excommunicate, that was a response to Invade the Papal States, Frederick played Besiege Rome. And I know this stack is getting complicated, but just follow me here. And then, in response to Frederick playing Besieged Rome, in response to Gregory playing Excommunicate, in response to Frederick playing Invade the Papal States, Gregory slaps down Die of Spite. Haha, wait, what? Oh, Gregory just keeled over. Natural causes, but probably stress or mana pool related. Leaving Frederick with the only card he could play. Go back to Sicily. Because in all his diplomacy, he'd claimed that his beef was with Gregory and not with the papacy itself. And now that old Papa Greg was dead, well, there really was no political cover to add Rome to his empire. But the election of the next pope took a while, because there was a Europe-wide crisis. See, the Mongols at this point had just smashed into Hungary and Poland, and while they never ended up going further into Europe, the continent-wide freakout let Frederick, the guy who'd probably lead any military response, position himself as the defender of Christendom. But that wasn't the only thing raising his prestige, for Frederick's court was gaining fame as a bit of a wonderland. His supporters called him the Stupor Mundi, the marvel of the world, and he surrounded himself with intellectuals, from poets and mathematicians to astrologers and academics. Fibonacci, the greatest Western mathematician of the Middle Ages, known for popularizing the Hindu-Arabic number system in Europe and discovering the sequence named after him, was a guest there. Plus, Jewish and Muslim scholars worked in his orbit, and his finance minister was African. He heavily sponsored poets writing in Sicilian, spurring literary developments that would give birth to the sonnet and impacting the literary language of Italy that would eventually help shape modern Italian. Oh, but when they all wrote, they didn't do it on scraped sheepskin vellum. Oh no, because Frederick's court in Palermo was the first in Europe to adopt paper. Not to mention, Frederick personally was a writer himself, specifically an early naturalist. His lifelong work was a huge illustrated treatise titled On Hunting with Birds, which on the surface is a book about falconry. But when you dig into it, also categorizes bird varieties, falcon anatomy, their behaviors, their diet, their prey, and other scientific observations. Though there was a supposedly dark side to that. As we showed in the introduction, there are stories from the period claiming that Frederick performed horrific human experiments. Not only did this include the digestion experiment, but also sealing a man in a barrel to see if Frederick could see the soul escaping from his body. He was also supposed to have conducted a natural language study, where he had 2 babies taken from their mothers and raised by nurses who were instructed to never communicate with them. Would they end up speaking the language of their original mothers? Or would it be Hebrew, the language of Adam and Eve? Well, no, it turns out they just died. And could all that be true? Maybe. Straight up, Frederick was a cruel man, utterly ruthless in both personal and political spheres. But there is a reason to believe these stories were either invented or embellished. The man recording them was a stone-cold papal agent, and this was a period of Frederick's reign where his relations with the papacy were their worst, if you can believe it. Because the new pope, Innocent IV, would end up being Frederick's greatest enemy. After supporting a rebel cardinal who declared Frederick a heretic and precursor of the Antichrist, Innocent felt so threatened by Frederick's military response that he fled to northern Italy. In the next few years, Innocent would try to have Frederick deposed, funnel money to rebellions in both Germany and Italy, set up a rival king in Germany, and publish an absolute blizzard of propaganda against Frederick. This included claiming he preferred Islam to Christianity, kept a harem, and did not believe in the Christian religion. In fact, Innocent claimed Frederick had written a book that called Christ, Moses, and Muhammad the, quote, 3 deceivers. Oh, and of course he excommunicated him for a 3rd time. Or 4th, really, depending on how you're counting him. Just to be clear, most of these claims weren't true, but taking this propaganda too seriously actually skewed our vision of Frederick, as until recently, historians tended to treat him as some early atheist. Now, that does seem unlikely given the evidence, and historians today generally consider Frederick to have been religiously conventional for a medieval monarch, though with a high degree of skepticism in papal power. Speaking of that, by Innocent's election, Frederick had entered his last years and was beginning to slow down. He also started becoming more insular, especially after 1246, when he discovered that Pope Innocent had organized a plot to assassinate him, and the plotters included many of his closest advisors. Innocent even tried to declare a crusade against Frederick. This all came amid a series of military setbacks. Though Frederick did win a great deal, in fact once he even conducted a siege where he built a whole wooden city around the besieged city, he did also suffer the worst defeats of his reign during this time. He even lost the royal treasury during one particularly crushing loss. Plus his health was failing. Yet when he died, wearing the robes of a monk, he remained one of the most powerful monarchs in Europe. In fact, his political position was so strong that many European monarchs had simply ignored Innocent's call to join a crusade against him. But while his Hohenstaufen dynasty wouldn't survive his son Conrad, Frederick's own legacy remains. He's known as one of the most interesting, consequential, and vigorous monarchs of the Middle Ages. He was so well loved in Germany that rumors grew that Frederick was not actually dead and was merely sleeping underneath a mountain, only to emerge when the Holy Roman Empire needed him most. In fact, 34 years after his death, a man claiming to be Frederick returned from the grave and made himself known in Cologne. Though ejected from the city, he developed a following, using forged documents, held court, issued decrees in a royal seal, and allied with a rebel movement against King Rudolf of Habsburg. Which only proves Frederick's enduring power, right? People were willing to believe he'd been resurrected to rule his lands once more, at least until King Rudolf captured the imposter and burned him at the stake, which will pretty much put a kibosh on anything. Bringing to a final end, the reign of a man who'd captured Europe's imagination, the unholy Roman Emperor. Of course, while imagination capturing is always welcome in my book, I would prefer that some things remain, like uncapturable, specifically stuff like my personal data online. Until we started working with Incogni, I actually had no idea how much of my personal information was being sold and published by data brokers online without me even knowing about it. Not to mention data breaches leaking our personal information saw a yearly uptick of 41.5%, and due to, the state of the world, I'm willing to bet that sadly is not going to be going down anytime soon. And your data being sold or stolen can lead to any number of issues, ranging from the annoyances of constant robocalls all the way up to the absolutely catastrophic stuff like identity theft. But now with Incogni, I am not alone. Because after a very speedy sign-up process, they got to work just slapping down data brokers and people search sites with takedown notices to remove my personal info. And it's not a one-time thing either, because Incogni uses regional laws and ordinances to continue making sure my data stays removed no matter where it pops up. And I get to keep track of it through their real-time dashboard and email updates. Like a few hours ago, I got an email telling me that my data has now been scrubbed from 405 sites. That is a lot less me, and I am here for it. So if you would like to keep your personal data, your personal data, you can get 60% off Incogni right now by scanning here or clicking the link in the description. You know the drill. Or you can actually just go to incogni.com/extrahistory and use our code extrahistory. Again, click right here to go Incogni, and then once you've ruined a data broker's day, why not check out another of our videos here in celebration? Thank you so much to Zeliad's Architectures, Lotus Wolf, Kuya Koi, Joseph Blame, Hunter Z, Dominic Valenciana, Arclight Games, and Angelo Valenciana for being absolutely wonderful legendary patrons.